Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to tonight's James C. Mead Lecture, From the Nation's Capital to Oklahoma City, a Washington Gallery's brave struggle to support contemporary art, presented by Dr. Erich Keel. Thank you to all of you, our Friends and Sustainers members, for your pivotal support for the museum. And thank you especially to members of the Mead family, Durward, Caroline, Virginia, the rest of the family here. I didn't say Durward last time, so I said Durward this time. For your continued support of the exhibition. Thank you all. We really appreciate it. Now to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Erich Keel served as the Kreeger Museum's head of education for 14 years, and if you've never been to the Kreeger Museum, it's a really wonderful place in Washington, D.C., before retiring in 2013. Dr. Keel was born and raised in Zurich, Switzerland, where he began his university studies in English, philosophy, and art history. He earned a PhD with a dissertation on the French philosopher Merleau-Ponty from Emory University in Atlanta. He has also written on theater, cinema, and the visual arts, and is the editor and co-author of Hear Art/See Music, Educator's Guide for Visiting the Museum in 2010. Since 2009, Keel has been on the curatorial team of the Arts Club of Washington, D.C., exhibiting painters, printmakers, and photographers of the greater Washington area. His current studies focus on selected themes in European and American art history, including symbolism, color theory, and abstraction. And the latter two, you'll see a lot of that tonight. Tonight, Dr. Keel is going to speak to us about one of the most important stories in our museum's history, the history and fate of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art and its collection. His lecture will draw on the original research that he performed for his essay in Paul Reed, A Retrospective Catalog, which is now on sale in the museum store. Please, after tonight, run out and get, I don't think we're open after the lecture, but anytime now between today and the exhibition opening November 22nd, please make sure to pick up your catalog. It's a wonderful publication, and we're very thankful and proud of Dr. Keel's contribution to that publication. It was published by Marquand Books and edited by David Gariff, who will be our speaker for our Sustainers opening when the exhibition opens. November 19th is the date to save for that. Now, to everybody, please help me welcome Dr. Erich Keel.
Thank you so much for your generous introduction. I also want to thank David Gariff, the chief curator for the Paul Reed exhibition. He invited me to write about, to do the research on this subject. And by pure coincidence, he happens to live on the same floor in a core building in Washington. We are just living 3 apartments apart. So it's really it's a gift to be a neighbor of such a highly educated and truly a true scholar and a person passionate about art. So I have just had a chance to look at the Paul Reed catalog, and one thing I could say is it would make a great Christmas gift, or any New Year's Eve gift. If you don't celebrate Christmas, for any gift, for a birthday gift, it is, the colors are absolutely stunning. The quality of the plates, painting reproduced, are extraordinary. Really, I think your museum did a job that's on the level of Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan. Yeah. So with this, I would like to I would like to begin my talk on the brief history of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art, which is what the Washington Gallery here refers to, which opened on November 1st, 1962 to the public and closed on September 30th in 1968. Its history was brief and turbulent. It is my goal tonight to explain why it lasted only 6 years, and in spite of highly... Is the mic working? Okay. And in spite of highly educated board of trustees and museum directors. Finally, we will also learn why the gallery's permanent collection, its most valuable asset, ended in Oklahoma City. First, let's look at the location of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art. It was located on 21st Street, right here, and right a half a block south of Massachusetts Avenue. Number 5, this is the location of the Phillips collection, which bills itself as the first museum of modern art in this country, and it opened in 1921. The whole map, of course, is of the DuPont Circle area, and those of you who know Washington, if you walk this direction, you will come to Georgetown, and here, of course, you have Embassy Row. So it was an excellent location that chosen in terms of presenting, attracting visitors to a museum of contemporary art. The gallery's building is actually located at 1503 21st Street. Today, it is occupied by the Polish embassy, and this is the building here. It is a townhouse, 4 stories, and recently renovated, I believe, by the Polish embassy. This is, as a matter of fact, the block, the way it looks now. I took the picture just a week ago in Washington. How did the Washington Gallery of Modern Art come about? Alice Denny, whom we see on the left, was talking to her friend Julian Eisenstein at a Thanksgiving reception in 1960, when she declared, and I quote, "What we really need here is a museum of modern art." To which Julian Eisenstein responded, "Sounds like a good idea to me. Let's get together." Originally a nutritionist, Denny was the director of the Jefferson Place Gallery, an excellent web page in case you're interested in on this on the internet. The Jefferson Place Gallery, an artist cooperative founded to promote the work of painters and sculptors in the greater Washington area. At that time, her husband, a lawyer, worked for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Julian Eisenstein was a Harvard-trained physicist working for the National Bureau of Standards. Eisenstein was married to Elizabeth Levison, whom we see right here. Elizabeth Levison with her husband at home, whom he had met at Harvard, where Elizabeth earned a PhD in history. Elizabeth was born into a family of wealth. Her father was Sam Levison, whom the New York Times referred to as, and I quote, "a noted industrialist who was one of America's foremost collectors of modern art." Sam Levison was a trustee of the Met Museum and the vice president of MoMA in New York. Eisenstein's marriage to a wealthy Wilson Levison largely explains why he, as a federal employee, could even consider founding a museum of modern art. My wife was a federal employee, and we can't even afford a Van Gogh, so. In the spring of 1961, gallerist Denny, here in the center, and Julian Eisenstein, the physicist, formed a group they called the Contemporary Arts Council. They recruited clockwise from top left Nicholas Satterley, a Harvard-trained architect with expertise in historic preservation. They recruited Lally Lloyd, a nationally recognized collector of contemporary art who grew up in a community along the exclusive Philadelphia Main Line. She spent 14 years in D.C., where her husband, Gates Lloyd, an investment banker, worked for the CIA as deputy director. We'll come across the CIA a few more times. Big shadow on our city. Yeah. And at the bottom is Lucius Battle, a diplomat who held many high-ranking posts, including ambassador to Egypt. From 56 to 61, he was vice president of Colonial Williamsburg in Virginia. And finally, on the lower left, Lenny Stern, an artist who ran an art rental gallery. The group submitted a certificate of incorporation on October 24th, 1961. They named the museum the Washington Gallery of Modern Art and listed themselves as the gallery's trustees, electing Eisenstein, the physicist, as the first president of the board. Let's look at Article 3, Paragraph 1 and Paragraph 3, which are here singled out with an arrow. And in Paragraph 1, the certificate states that the business of the gallery is to exhibit for the public contemporary work in painting, sculpture, architecture, crafts, and other visual arts. And that's important. And similar work from earlier periods when desired. And Paragraph 3 here on the top. The business of the gallery is to establish and maintain a collection of paintings, sculpture, drawings, prints, ceramics, and such other objects as the trustees shall decide may contribute to the accomplishment of the other purposes of the corporation. Beautiful legalese, huh? It is an awkward way of saying that the gallery plans to maintain a permanent collection. So the 2 points, permanent collection and the business is also to show works from earlier period. After incorporating the gallery, the most urgent need was to secure funding. 4 days after submitting the certificate, the board received a $100,000 grant from the Edgar Stern Family Fund. Today, this will be about $1.1 million. Director of the Stern family was Philip Stern, husband of founding trustee Lenny Stern. Philip was the maternal grandson of financier Julius Rosenwald, one of the founders of Sears and Roebuck department store. With this substantial grant, the gallery could begin to look for a director. What we see here, of course, between the two, between Lenny and Philip Stern, is a sculpture, stainless steel sculpture by David Smith, Q/14 of 1963. So you see, here's the trustee, especially she, are really tuned into contemporary art. When the board learned that Adeline Breeskin, a beautiful regal picture of this important person, when Adeline Breeskin, director of the Baltimore Museum of Art, planned to retire, they asked Lally Lloyd, their vice president, to invite her to lead the new museum. Breeskin accepted and moved to Washington. She assumed her new position in June '62. Breeskin had led the Baltimore Museum of Art for 20 years, where she enjoyed an international reputation. She had persuaded the Cohn sisters to donate their art collection, which included 600 works by Matisse. Today, thanks to Breeskin, the BMA is a museum with the largest Matisse collection in the world. Following the hiring of a director, the board quickly expanded. One of the important members who joined was Catherine Graham, whom we see on the right, daughter of Agnes and Eugene Meyer. Eugene Meyer was a financier and banker. He bought the bankrupt Washington Post in 1933. In the 40s, Catherine's husband, Philip Graham, took over as publisher. And when Graham died of a suicide in '63, his wife Catherine continued, first as president and later as publisher. In February of '62, shortly after Catherine had joined the board, the gallery received a $50,000 grant from the foundation led by her parents. With the Meyer grant, the gallery was ready to lease or purchase a property for their museum. The decision fell on the 4-story townhouse I showed you earlier. Here we see Breeskin at the entrance of the future museum. The owner at that time was a patent lawyer. The townhouse was built in 1896. It featured large rooms, tall ceilings, and sturdy floors, ideal for exhibiting contemporary art, including large sculpture. The next question for the board and director was, what should be shown at the opening of the gallery? Sorry. In May of 1962, Franz Klein died unexpectedly. Being small and nimble, the gallery quickly put together a memorial exhibition. The painting illustrated on the catalog cover is Orange and Black Wall of 1959. Klein was a major abstract expressionist, I'm sure you know him, and friends and admirers of his art came from all over the country. So did Washington's establishment. The exhibition was a spectacular success. This picture captures a moment at the gala reception on October 30, 1962. In front, on the left, is Margaret McNamara talking to Madame Alphand. Behind Mrs. McNamara is the Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, and in conversation with the French ambassador Hervé Armand, and in background, of course, is Julian Eisenstein, the president of the gallery. This photograph was taken at the press opening of the Klein exhibition. In the center again, Julian Eisenstein. On the left, Alice Denny. On the right, the director of the museum, Adeline Brieskin. And behind them is very impressive a part of the painting by Klein. The name is Turin of 1960. Alice Denny, shown on the left, had resigned as a founding trustee, and on the insistence of the board of President Eisenstein, she was given the post of assistant director. Not everybody was happy with this decision. One trustee feared this could lead to difficulties because the director, Brieskin, had no say in this decision. This photograph paints a picture of harmony, but as we shall see, the fears of the trustee were soon to be borne out. The Klein exhibition was followed by, in rapid succession, by 2 one-person shows and 2 group exhibitions. One of the group shows was Popular Image Exhibition, curated by Denny, and that opened in April 1963. Denny used this occasion to present some of the principal pop artists that emerged in New York: Jim Dine, Lichtenstein, Klaus Oldenburg, Rosenquist, Andy Warhol, and Tom Wesselmann. All the major figures of that, the pop art movement, which were just emerging in New York at that time. And it was Jim Dine himself who designed the cover of this catalog. The show was a success, one of the first to present pop art in the context of a museum. It also led to a permanent estrangement between the director and the curator of the show, Alice Denny. And the reason? A painting by Wesselmann. Why the conflict? Brieskin asked Denny not to include Wesselmann's Great American Nude number 21. Denny refused and began an aggressive campaign to keep number 21 in the show. The conflict became so intense that the board had to intervene. The director prevailed, but the damage was done. The two could no longer communicate. An intolerable situation in a museum that had only 4 or 5 paid staff. We can only guess why Brieskin objected. It seems many of you have already realized the cause. My sense is that it was not the nude that bothered her. There were 3 more paintings by Wesselmann in the show, and they were all nudes. But the juxtaposition of the nude with President Kennedy is what may have caused her to object. I think it seems very obvious. We should also remember that the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, was an honorary trustee of the gallery. Yeah. It's interesting that Alice Denny didn't have that sensibility, didn't see that, that concern that Adeline Breeskin had. That Denny was ready for the fight should not surprise. The 2 women had completely different views of how to run a museum of contemporary art. Before Breeskin could even assume her position in June of '62, Denny declared, and I'm reading, she, Breeskin, is not as knowledgeable about the strictly contemporary as she should be, and is not a creative director. How should we assess Denny's judgment? Consider the Washington Post image on the right. It features Breeskin in her, yes, she is, in her exhibition, Sculptors of Our Time, that opened a few months after Denny's popular image exhibition. Breeskin's show couldn't be more contemporary. In the foreground is Arnoldo Pomodoro. He was an Italian artist. Arnoldo Pomodoro's Sfera #1, dated 1963, the year of the exhibition. And behind Breeskin, David Smith's stainless steel sculpture, Lectern Sentinel, completed in 1961. Another point of contention was the issue of modern versus contemporary art. Denny states in an interview of 1975, and I'm quoting, well, one of the big splits came when she, Breeskin, wanted to bring Van Gogh here. It had already been in Baltimore, and it was a very expensive show. A lot of renovating had to be done of the gallery. I didn't think that we had to do that. I mean, there were so many contemporary exhibitions to be done, unquote. Some on the board, too, were against bringing the collection of Van Gogh from Amsterdam to Washington. Apparently, Trustee Satterley, the architect, objected to the show until he saw the long lines that formed to enter the gallery. Ironically, Van Gogh was by far the most successful exhibition mounted by the gallery. Average daily attendance was 1,400 versus 18 for a preceding Ellsworth Kelly exhibition. So you see that Adeline Breeskin really had a sense of a balance between the contemporary and the classical artists of the modernist movement. We see here on the left Lady Bird Johnson, a wonderful photograph, I believe, of her, talking to the ambassador of Netherlands, and then is Adeline Breeskin talking to Vincent van Gogh, who is nephew of the painter Van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh was the son of the painter Van Gogh's brother, Theo van Gogh. Yeah. And she knew him very well, and that's the reason she was able to show at the gallery Vincent van Gogh's personal collection of his uncle's paintings. By the time Van Gogh opened in February of '64, Denny had taken a leave of absence and Breeskin had resigned. She stayed on to shepherd through the Van Gogh exhibition and give the board time to search for a new director. Her successor was Gerald Nordland, Dean of the Juilliard Art Institute in LA. His tenure may be considered the golden years of the gallery. 2 points are here important to our story. He pursued a philosophy that was exactly Breeskin's, showing both classics of modernism and contemporary art, just as the Post headline here announces. And when Denny returned from her leave of absence, Nordland declined to rehire her. He began with a clean sheet. There was never going to be another assistant director. Imposing Denny on Breeskin may have been Eisenstein's fatal mistake. It torpedoed the gallery before it had time to fully establish itself. Nordland's noteworthy achievement was identifying an art train in Washington, D.C., and mounting a show that has entered art history. And of course, you are very familiar with this particular subject. Huh? The cover shows, mentions the 6 major artists: Lewis, Nolan, Davis, Downing, Mering, Reed, and many of those are in your collection. I don't think you have Kenneth Nolan. Important. You have to get one. That's your next mission. Yes. Nordland, one of the reasons the exhibition made such an impact was the director's ability to sell it to venues in different parts of the country, such as the University of Texas Art Galleries in Austin and the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, Minnesota. One of the canvases, beautiful reproduction. Thank you, Brian. He helped me getting a good image of this painting. Huh? One of the canvases that Nordland included was number 17 by Paul Reed, now in your collection. Each of the 6 artists was represented with one color illustration in the catalog. And in the case of Paul Reed, Nordland picked number 17. Number 17 exhibits some of the defining qualities, I believe, that Nordland identified among the 6 Washington painters. It is an acrylic, presenting an abstract composition of flat shapes in bright colors. There is no sense of texture. We don't see any brushstrokes. And there's no suggestion of pictorial depth. It's an excellent example of what the critic Clement Greenberg referred to as post-painterly abstraction. Nordland was also responsible for the first exhibition of the gallery's permanent collection. Shown here is the cover of the catalog with an illustration of Red Blue by Ellsworth Kelly. Red Blue was a gift of trustee Lally Lloyd in honor of Adeline Breeskin. The catalog of your museum, Breaking the Mold, is a catalog I really enjoyed reading, features the same work on its cover. The establishment of a permanent collection was another point of contention between Nordland's predecessor and assistant director, between Breeskin and Denny. In one interview, Denny states emphatically, "I didn't want a permanent collection." What this declaration indicates to me is a misunderstanding of how an art museum functions. The first acquisition by the Washington Gallery of Modern Art was the vendor, which again is in your collection, an oil by Grace Hartigan. It was a gift by the artist, the first that the gallery received, and that before it even had opened. There were no acquisition funds in the gallery. The collection was acquired entirely through gifts. Nordland announced his resignation in February 1966, just before he installed the permanent collection. With his departure, the gallery's golden years came to an end. Nordland produced more catalogues with substantial introduction than any other of the 4 directors. Where he failed was to put his museum on solid financial footing. At the end of fiscal year 1966, which was June 30th, there was a deficit of $21,000, $210,000 in today's money. In other words, in spite of his curatorial successes, the gallery was in financial distress. So far, we have mainly talked about directors. What about the gallery's presidents? In 1965, Julian Eisenstein resigned. He had fulfilled his 3-year term, had added 1 year because nobody on the board was ready. He now invited his Harvard classmate, Carlton Swift, we see him on the left, to succeed him. Swift was from a family who had made a fortune in the Chicago meat packing industry. He himself had carved out a career as an operative for US spy agencies going back to World War II. Against the CIA. I understand the CIA has an outstanding art collection. Yes, yeah. And the docent of my museum, Kreeger Museum, once took a tour. I was not allowed to go because I don't have an American passport. But apparently it's an interesting situation. With Northern gone, Swift had to look for a new director. He hired Charles Millett III, who had brief stints as assistant to directors at the Fogg Art Museum and at Dumbarton Oaks. Although Millett was a Greenbergian, promoting art in the mode of Washington color painters, he did not get a chance to make an impact on the gallery. Of the 4 gallery's directors, he had the most thankless job, seeking to avoid insolvency. And insolvency reached the very doors of the gallery. Here I would like to quickly read the 2 paragraphs that appeared in the Washington's Evening Star on April 1967. Modern Art Gallery in money pinch. The Washington Gallery of Modern Art will cancel all exhibitions after June 25th because it lacks funds. Mrs. Philip M. Stern, acting chairman of the Gallery Board of Trustees, said today that the Avant-Garde and Experimental Art Center at 1503 21st Street Northwest needs $100,000. That means more than $1 million in today's money to operate properly. In other words, the gallery is experiencing an existential crisis. 8 months into Millett's tenure in March 67, the deficit had grown from $21,000 to $27,000. In fact, by the end of fiscal year on June 30th, the deficit stood at $48,000, and there was no grant money to cover it up, as had been the case in previous fiscal years. Sorry. The closing date of June 25th, mentioned by the Evening Star, was the last day of an important show, New Aesthetic, dedicated to minimalism, one of the art trends that have come to define the 60s. The curator was Barbara Rose, wife of Frank Stella. Even in this difficult moment, the gallery presented exhibitions of highest quality. The response to the announcement of the closing was remarkable. Letters poured in expressing disappointment and were filled with questions. Why? The word of closure reached as far as Champaign, Illinois. I'm citing here this letter from Muriel Christensen, Associate Director of the Granite Art Museum, because of the salient point she makes. Let me read part of the second paragraph. Washington does need an independent gallery of contemporary art, where programs can be presented without reference to some of the necessary restrictions that pertain to the government-operated museums in Washington. Fortunately, a group of young professionals referred to as junior friends thought the gallery could be saved and were ready to get to work. Leader of the Junior Friends was Oklahoma City-born J. Robert Porter, Jr., pictured on the left. His father owned an oil exploration company. He attended Dartmouth College, where he developed a deep interest in photography. In '62, listen, he began to work for the CIA, Satellite Imagery Division. '66, he transferred to NASA, and in '69, he founded EarthSat, which he grew into as the largest commercial provider of satellite imagery. At the special board meeting, June 28, 1967, most of the trustees, including President Swift, resigned to make room for new members. Lenny Stern, shown on the right, she stayed on, and she was elected president. with Robert Porter serving as vice president. With this election, the final chapter of the gallery's existence begins on a hopeful note. Porter and his friends, Porter and his friends lead a membership drive, increasing the roster between June 67 and January 68 from about 1,000 members to 1,600 members. And secondly, Lenny Stern secured $30,000 from $10,000 each from the Meyer Foundation and the Stern Foundation, and $10,000 from members and trustees in the form of matching grants. In another development, Stern hired a new director, Walter Hobbs. It's a very dramatic photograph by Mary Swift. She was the first wife of Carlton Swift, the president we just mentioned. Walter Hobbs had a very distinguished career. He led the Pasadena Museum of Art, where he staged nationally acclaimed exhibitions, such as the first Marcel Duchamp retrospective. Hobbs was equally famous for delays. A pioneering Cornell show was postponed 3 times, and the catalog was not ready for the exhibition, as opposed to your museum. You have a catalog, and it's a wonderful way to have a catalog ready as a way of promoting an exhibition. So, and his reputation at the Corcoran, where he became director in 1970, wasn't much better. Corcoran staff began wearing buttons that read, "Walter Hobbs will arrive in 20 minutes," because he was always late to the meetings. Everybody agreed Hobbs was an ideas man, exceptionally gifted, but the wrong person to direct the museum, especially one in distress. He was not meant to be an administrator, but Lenny Stern was eager to hire him, replacing Charles Millard, who returned to Harvard. Hers, I believe, was a most unfortunate decision. Hobbs' tenure began with a festival that signaled a major change in the gallery's mission. The gallery decided to exhibit a selection of children's art that had been created in a summer program. And what we see here is two visitors to the gallery who are looking at photographs that were taken during the summer arts program. And as I mentioned, pictures of the children then were presented in the gallery itself. This unexpected turn in the gallery's interest was explained by Lenny Stern in a letter to members. I quote, "The Washington Gallery of Modern Art is moving in new directions. In a redefinition of what an art gallery is and for whom it exists, the gallery believes it can reach new people through new concepts. By taking art and artists out of the gallery, a 4-walled repository, and by bringing that art and those artists into their own city, the gallery can reach people who ordinarily would not go into an art gallery." I don't think she is wrong here, but simply I believe it was the wrong moment to do that in terms of the internal history of the gallery. Another example of the new direction of which Lenny Stern wrote was Lloyd McNeil's Intercourse 68 exhibit, which opened in January of 68. McNeil was a Washington-born black artist and musician. His Intercourse 68 was a happening, a rare 152-hour composition of light, sound, and graphic imagery. Highly experimental, Intercourse 68 included live music and hands-on experiences for visitors. The 152 hours were spread over the time the gallery was open to the public, about 17 days. The very title of Intercourse was, of course, problematic for the board. And it was Lenny Stern who pushed it through that he could name this exhibition the way he wanted. And of course, this had nothing to do with sex. This had to do intercourse with the different types of art, music, visual arts, and a light show. So that was his understanding, his way of titling the exhibition. Moving even further away from conventional museum practices was the Artist Fellowship Program. In March '68, the gallery awarded one-year fellowships that include free studios and stipends for art materials. Hobbs selected 5 Washington-based candidates: Sam Gilliam, Rockne Krebs, a sculptor, Joe Cameron, a photographer, and then this architect, Doug Michaels, and Robert Fields, another architect of whom I could not find a portrait. Best known, of course, today is Sam Gilliam. He has 2 paintings in your collection, and I had the wonderful opportunity to see them this morning. Khufu from 1965 and Skycore from 1966. The artist fellowships were possible thanks to a $50,000 grant from the Stern Family Fund. Philip Stern preferred to support social change rather than supporting museums as such. Another challenge to the survival of the gallery was the social upheaval that followed the April 4th assassination of Martin Luther King. This image is of Washington's H Street between 12th and 13th Streets. What we see is the aftermath of the riots, which had lasted 4 days. It was not an encouraging moment to seek support for a small museum of contemporary art. I mean, this particular image has the feel of the bombing of Dresden. It's really, it is astounding. Huh? And I'm pretty sure many of you lived through the times of the 60s. I came to this country in '67. So it was, of course, it's something one cannot forget. Huh? In spite of the successful membership drive and the various grants that Lenny Stern has secured, the gallery's days were numbered. Frank Getlin, the caustic critic of Washington's Sunday Star, reports on July 28th that merger talks with the Corcoran Gallery had begun, unbeknownst to many. Here it says, Corcoran, modern, talking merger. Even Walter Hobbs, who made the foreign appeal as late as July, and I'm quoting, "Dear Washington Gallery of Modern Art guest, now that the gallery has come through its period of uncertainty with critical acclaim and national attention, we are redoubling our efforts to make new friends who will join with us in our goal of bringing the best in contemporary art to Washington." In his interview with Judy Markley, who passed away sadly last April, Hobbs admitted that he didn't know when Stern had decided to dissolve the gallery. I want to add here that Judy Markley wrote a fine thesis for the University of Oklahoma about the history of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art. I think she completed in 1989, and she had this rare opportunity to talk to many of the participants, including Walter Hobbs, when she worked on her thesis. So I highly recommend it. And let's look at what might have motivated Lenny Stern to give up on the idea of an independent gallery dedicated to contemporary art, and instead to seek a merger with the Corcoran. Let's look at the chart quickly. The first year of operation, it shows the gallery's operations income versus expenses. And in the first year, we have a surplus of almost 100,000. And the reason is the gallery hadn't opened yet. As a matter, Breeskin was only had been working for 1 month. The second year, surplus of 11,000. That was when the gallery showed Franz Klein and the pop art exhibition we discussed. The third year, a dramatic surplus of 57,000, thanks to, of course, to the Van Gogh exhibition. And then things started going down. 24,000 deficit in '65, little better at 1,066. Then the crisis year 67 with $48,000 deficit, which then improved artificially, I believe, through the membership drive of Porter, through her getting funds from the Stern and Meyer Foundation with a slight surplus of 7.8 thousand. So, in spite of this surprising surplus in the final fiscal year, what I believe it masks the reality behind the gallery's finances. And also I believe Lenny Stern must have realized that she could not go back year after year to the same two foundations. She needed $100,000 a year to fund the gallery. As she told the Evening Star, what the gallery needed was a permanent source of income. The diagram, this diagram, prepared by the American Association of Museums and published in 1963, presents the average sources of income of functioning art museums with budgets, it says here, with budgets under 10,000, from budgets under 10,000 to including $100,000. So the gallery, the Washington Gallery of Modern Art, really fits that particular category. The principal sources of income in this case are endowments, 38%, and municipal support, 21%. So if you look at here's this pie, the two largest pieces make up more than half of the support for running a museum. Our takeaway, the Washington Gallery of Modern Art had no endowment and received no municipal funding. Given these circumstances, the gallery was simply not viable long term. The merger with the Corcoran was a complex affair involving real estate, staff, membership, and of course the permanent collection. It is with the question of disposing the collection that Oklahoma City becomes an important player, specifically the Oklahoma Art Center. A concern for the gallery was that its collection stayed together. Here, Robert Porter stepped in again. Porter contacted his friend in Oklahoma, Winston Eason, who served at the time as the treasurer of the Oklahoma Art Center. Vincent Eason, born in Marlow, Oklahoma, he began to work in his father's oil company, eventually becoming its president and board chairman. From 60 to 63, he was president of the Oklahoma Art Center. The Daily Oklahoman wrote of his, and I'm quoting, deep interest in art, unquote. As treasurer, Eason negotiated on behalf of his board with the Washington Gallery of Modern Art. At that time, Sylvan Goldman was the art center's president. He is here on the right. As some of you may know, Goldman was a successful owner of a supermarket chains and the inventor of the shopping cart, with which he made a lot of money. Yeah. Eason and Goldman, with the board, raised the funds, $110,000 for the purchase of the permanent collection. It was a bargain. With this purchase, the Oklahoma Art Center obtained a permanent collection of 150 pieces that reflect some of the most exciting art of the 50s and 60s. It is also the only part of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art that remains intact. The Corcoran, which received the gallery's cash, real estate, staff, and membership, closed its doors in 2014. Thank you for listening to my talk on this arcane subject. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you so much.
Any questions for Dr. Keel? Oh, first question, please tell us about your tie.
Say again?
Please tell us about your tie. It looks like Gene Davis. No, your tie that you're wearing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, my tie is based on a Gene Davis painting from the Corkin Gallery of Art. Yeah.
Spot on.
Okay.
Thank you. For those who don't know, we have two Gene Davises in our collection, both Autumn Largo and Cool Staccato. Cool Staccato will be on view when you exit the exhibition of Paul Reed. You'll go into the Legacy of the Washington Color School. And the painting that we have on view, represented by Gene Davis, is
Make
Cool
a tie
Staccato.
for your gift shop. Yeah.
Let's let Richard know.
Yeah.
Other questions for our scholar, please. The question was the purchase of the entire collection, or was there potentially some objects not included in that purchase?
6 objects were not included. But 156 Walter Hobbs counted in the permanent collection of the gallery. 150 came here, and 6 were not sent because of some legal situations, papers, and some hadn't fully been signed yet. So in other words, 6 objects didn't show up here in Oklahoma, but 150 did. Yeah.
Please. The question was, did other institutions or museums try to acquire the collection besides the Oklahoma Art Center?
It was a discussion if Oklahoma had rejected it. But Robert Porter was so quick and got in touch with Winston Eason, and Winston Eason knew that Oklahoma needed a permanent collection, improve its permanent collection, that this went very fast. Imagine, it was in July that we find out that Lenny Stern decided to make a merger. By end of September, it had already been everything been done. Yeah, it was a rapid, people had barely time to really discuss it. Yeah, so quickly it went. Yeah.
Please.
Oh yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it was both. I mean, as I mentioned to one of your visitors here, we had, at the reception, there's the famous saying of Lincoln, "A divided house cannot stand." That was happened to the gallery, the Washington Gallery of Modern Art, and the tragedy was it happened so early. You know, a museum that's 50 years old can digest such a conflict, but if you're just trying to get up on your feet, it was too much. And you only have 4 to 5 staff. There were about 7 to 8 staff by time Walter Hobbs took over. So very small museum. They worked, of course, with a lot of volunteers. And, of course, there was financial mismanagement in terms of lack of membership drive. That was when Robert Porter came in. That was the first thing he noticed. We can really much more, really improve membership. But if you go back here, you see membership. Where is it? Membership is only 16%, huh? Yeah, or 14, 16% in the pie. Huh? So in other words, yes, it makes a difference. It is even more than the trustees' contribution, which are only 13% as a source of income. So that was it. And Truitt, I forget his first name, who was married to Anne Truitt, that's a famous artist. He was also a trustee later on. And Truitt said, the problem was with Washington, they didn't have these corporations and the CEOs who could really give substantial amount of money the way you have here in Oklahoma City, like, for example, Winston Eason or Goldman. You know. So in other words, that was because Washington was at that time not a a city with major businesses. The only business was government.
And Ann Truitt's husband was a journalist.
Say again?
Ann Truitt's husband was
Yes,
a journalist.
was a journalist. Yes, he works for the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Other questions? Please. How are the six artists of the Washington Color School exhibition selected, and why just them?
Oh, I don't think I can answer this question. It's a good question, but I don't know how Nordland made this selection. There was an important artist, Berkowitz, which you have in the collection as well, which kind of fits slowly, vaguely, into that group. The art scene in Washington in the 50s and 60s was very small, and they all knew each other. And there were a few art schools, for example, one near Dupont Circle, where Maurice Lewis was teaching, and where he got to know Kenneth Noland. And Kenneth Noland then was teaching at the Catholic University, where I think Howard Merring became one of his students. But it was a closely knit group of young artists who tried to get on their feet. I mean, Maurice Lewis was not so young anymore. He was the oldest one among them. But it is, Washington, I believe, my brother was an intern at the National Geographic magazine in photography in the 60s. And it was a real town. There was public transportation was minimal. So in other words, I don't think it was difficult for him to make this selection. Yeah.
Others? Please. This is one of those rare occasions where, as a museum, ethically, we do not speak about purchases. However, this is an exception because it was published in the Oklahoman. Will you again mention the dollar amount that we paid to purchase the entire
$110,000. $110,000. And the gallery received about $100,000 because $10,000 was used for sending this collection from Washington to Oklahoma. Yeah. I mean, yes, yes. That was Vincent Eason's, job, yes. Because he seems to have really responded enthusiastically when Robert Porter called him up. Yeah, they were friends, they knew each other. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Please, Malcolm. So the question is, how did the Washington Gallery of Modern Art exhibit or use its collection?
Oh, how did they use its collection? First of all, they had great difficulties storing it. Mm-hmm. It was in the basement. They wanted to buy some properties adjacent to P Street, but then there were not enough funds. And it was, of course, then Nordland who presented the first exhibition of the permanent collection. And it was also Breeskin's original idea that we need a permanent collection because when you close a show, you need something to bridge it, especially in a small building. When you have a show that fills the entire building, like the Van Gogh exhibition, they needed something to fill it in till they have ready for the next exhibition. But Nordland was the first one who formally presented a catalog and an exhibition of the permanent collection. Yeah.
Any others? Please. The 6 objects that were not a part of the acquisition because of legal matters.
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
I only remember that there was a Howard Merring, a beautiful Howard Merring was in it, which I think was a pity that you couldn't get.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That was kind of what I noticed. Yeah, because Howard Merring would have fit in very much into the Washington color painter collection. Yeah.
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 Please, Donna. Oh yeah, we focused on the artists that were exhibited or focused on, well, rather the Washington Color School. But in that collection, they ended up with a lot of painterly abstractionists from New York. Will you speak more to the other regional or movement represented artists in that collection?
In
that
the
ended up-
collection. Well, of course, there were abstract expressionists, as we saw with Grace Hardigan. And there was, for example, beautiful drawings by David Smith that David Smith gave to the gallery, Washington Gallery of Modern Art, to honor his two daughters. So, in other words, it was Ellsworth Kelly, we discussed. So, in other words, what Breeskin really wanted was after, and that was another kind of a controversy between her and Danny, was a question of being international versus only American. And Danny was into American art. And Breeskin said, we have to distinguish ourselves, we have to be international. And if the gallery had continued, and I believe he could have continued, for example, the Smithsonian Museum of American Art is only American. So in other words, they could have found its own niche. But to come back to your question about, it was a very eclectic thing, and some works, some artists are barely known today, because they were gifts. And so, and they didn't have the luxury, the great luxury to kind of reject gifts, let's say, the way as the larger museums have, Because, you don't want to offend the donors. You don't want to offend potential trustees. Yeah. Yeah.
Paul, Kristen, please.
Yes. Oh, yes. And that's a good question because that was mentioned. Phillips himself, I forget now his first name. Do you remember the first name of Phillips? The Phillips were honorary trustee of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art, honorary trustee, but they didn't participate. And they were a little bit reluctant to participate. They did see it as a competition, but the Washington Gallery of Modern Art clearly said the Phillips rarely showed contemporary works. They have the great masters of modernism, and occasionally they had small exhibitions in the basements of contemporary artists, very selected by the Phillips himself. So in other words, there was no real competition, and they admired, the Washington Gallery of Modern Art admired what the Phillips had done, but they didn't see it as a competition, and it would not have been. The only competition in Washington is the Hirshhorn. The Hirshhorn International, contemporary, with a lot of money, but it is a government institution. And that's what is mentioned here, what I mentioned in that letter. The Washington Gallery of Modern Art would have had that independence that the Hirshhorn has not. If you talk to curators at the Hirshhorns, they will tell you certain things we can't show, we can't do. Yeah, it's very obvious, So in other words, they could have established a beautiful niche in Washington, yeah.
I would say in celebration of a number of occasions. One, the acquisition of the WGMA ending up at the Oklahoma Art Center. Secondly, us including Paul Reed's number 17 in the exclusive North American venue for the Saint Pompidou's exhibition, Matisse in His Time, which was the impetus for the family deciding that we would be the destination for his, I don't know how to qualify this, probably most comprehensive collection of his broadest work from his earliest days to later. And now us celebrating this exhibition and hearing such a critical review of the history of the Washington Gallery of Modern Art and why it ended up here, I would like us all to celebrate those occasions in tonight's lecture. Thank you, Dr. Erich Keel.
Okay. Thank you.